Technological advances. New technology played a major role in advancing world exploration. Sailors began to use tools such as the magnetic compass and the astrolabe, a device that enabled navigators to learn their ship's location by charting the position of the stars. Better instruments made it possible for sailors to travel the open seas without landmarks to guide them. The Portuguese also made advances in shipbuilding. They began designing ships that were smaller, lighter, and easier to steer than the heavy galleons they had used before. These new ships, called caravels, used triangle sails that, unlike traditional square sails, allowed ships to sail against the wind. By placing rudders at the back of the ship, the Portuguese also improved the steering of the ships. A sea route to Asia. By the 1400s, Portugal had several motives, financial support, and the technology necessary for exploration. Portuguese explorers set out to find new lands. Rounding Africa. Even with new technology, travel on the open seas was dangerous and difficult. One person described the effect on sailors of a voyage from south from Portugal. Those which survived could hardly be recognized as human. They had lost flesh and hair. The nails had gone from their hands and feet. They spoke of heat so incredible that it was a marvel that the ships and crews were not burnt. In spite of the dangers, Portuguese explorers continued sailing south, setting up trading posts along the way. In 1488, Portuguese navigator Bartolomeu Dias led an expedition from Portugal southward along the African coast. A storm blew his ship around the southern tip of Africa. This point became known as the Cape of Good Hope. Diaz wanted to continue his voyage, but his men did not. Since supplies were very low, Diaz decided to call off the voyage and return to Portugal. Later, King Manuel of Portugal sent another explorer, Vasco da Gama, on an expedition around the Cape of Good Hope. Da Gama left Lisbon, Portugal, in July 1497 and arrived in southwestern India the next year. Portugal had won the European race for a sea route to Asia. When Da Gama reached the Indian port of Calicut, Muslim traders met him and his men. The Muslims surprised the sailors by speaking to them in Portuguese. Soon Da Gama and his crew learned that the people of India had been trading with Muslim and Italian merchants who knew Portuguese. Da Gama made two or more trips back to India. He even governed a small colony there. Results of exploration. Portugal's explorations would have major results, including the start of the Atlantic slave trade. As Portuguese sailors explored the west coast of Africa, they negotiated for gold, ivory, and slaves. The slave trade devastated African communities. It led to increased warfare among kingdoms and broke up many families. The Portuguese sent many enslaved Africans to Europe and to the islands in the Atlantic, where they lived and worked under brutal conditions. The other nations of Europe watched as new trade routes brought increased wealth and power to Portugal. They soon launched voyages of exploration to find their own water routes to Asia.